If it was a war about territory, why would they take Ukrainian children? Children are often hard to take care of as part of society. There is no immediate benefit to just like taking children. It's an intention of genocide, wiping Ukraine and making sure there is no recollection or societal memory about Ukraine being a nation, and that's what they do to these children.
Joining me now is Linda Chavez.
By my good friend Linda Chavez.
Linda, you are a conservative Republican. You worked for Ronald Reagan.
Former director of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission.
I will state right up front that I am a xenophiliac.
We have seen a growing movement of isolationism.
And that is a travesty.
And that we're not just against things. We have a clear idea of the direction we want to lead the nation.
I still have faith in the American people. Hello, I'm Linda Chavez. You're listening to Older Wiser, the podcast where we pursue a deeper understanding of the issues facing our freedoms, rather than just chasing the latest outrage. Older Wiser is a production of The Next Move and the Renew Democracy Initiative, where I'm proud to serve as vice chair. Thanks for tuning in. Katya Pavlevich is an advisor on the issue of abducted children at Razom for Ukraine. She is a founder of the Forget Us Not, an initiative to coordinate and empower civil society efforts on the return of abducted children. Katya also is a policy committee member of the American Coalition for Ukraine. She's been advocating for the return of Ukrainian stolen children since 2022. Within 3 years, Katya organized multiple events, briefings, and panels on the issue, as well as educational and advocacy outreach efforts around the U.S., partnering with prominent activists from Ukrainian and American organizations. Katya, I want to begin talking a little bit broadly about the war. We are now entering the 5th year of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. When Russia invaded, the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, said that the war would be over in 3 days. He would march into Kyiv, everybody would throw down their arms, surrender, everybody would be speaking Russian, and be patriotic Russian citizens today. Well, that didn't happen. Nor did it happen that when Donald Trump promised during the election that on day one he would bring peace to Ukraine. That has not happened. And in fact, 2025 has been a particularly bloody war. There have been at least 500,000, maybe as many as 1 million casualties in the war against Ukraine. There have been at least 140,000 people who have died in that war. But I want to focus today, and particularly on your work, Katya, with the children of Ukraine. And there are 3 areas I'd like to focus on. First, the children as the actual victims of the physical violence that Ukraine has brought. Second, I want to talk about the abducted children, because this was a very big issue at the beginning of a war. And third, I want to talk about what's happening in the occupied territories where Russia controls parts of Ukraine and what's happening to the children there. So let me begin. First, if you could tell us first of all, what does Razom mean? And tell us a little bit about your work there.
Thank you, Linda, for this important conversation and for focusing on children whose stories are often overlooked. I advise on the issue of abducted children at Razom for Ukraine. This is one of the largest organizations that helps Ukraine based in the U.S. We have office in New York, in D.C., in Ukraine, Kyiv, and today we've raised and delivered over $200 million worth of aid to Ukraine, and we've been supporting Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian medics, Ukrainian civil society. I, however, focus on advocacy work. We have advocacy team in DC, and I've been advocating for the return of abducted children when this issue first came up, in actually Russian press back in 2022. So I'm just like a small part of a big organization, a big effort to ensure that Ukraine succeeds, wins this war, and continues to be prosperous and democratic in the future.
So what does the word Razom mean?
Oh, it means together in Ukrainian. So I think a big part of our ethos is to collaborate, partner, and ensure communication across the ocean and deliver bigger impact together. Razom.
So you're very focused on the issue of children. And first, let's talk about what life is like for a child and for families in Ukraine. I mean, we've seen these terrible stories. There are places where there are only 2 hours of electricity a day, where heat has disappeared, the whole infrastructure. What's it like to be a child in Ukraine under those conditions?
Yes, I cannot imagine. I only go to Ukraine like once a year, but maybe twice a year. But I do make it my business to check on and see how does civil society, how does education system, how the government is helping children go through this crisis. As you may imagine, it's a unique challenge, and on a personal level, I cannot imagine how parents are dealing with these challenges. No heat, no electricity, no internet. I think the most visible, these are the most visible challenges that we see. Children are prevented from going to school or just living because of the shelling, and that we saw this a lot in the frontline territories. As the frontline moves, children continue being affected just by, threat to surviving. Then there is the level where there's disruption of education. It was a big issue around the world, remote studying, how it affects social ties between children and their capabilities to learn. Well, Ukraine never got out of COVID times. It just transitioned into war times, where there's a lot of remote studying. There are schools now built underground, and there is like a lot of uncertainty about children's education. So it affects children's ability to become adults, to receive proper education in their future. Then there are challenges, of like mental toll and that it takes on all children, even those who are in relative safety in the west of Ukraine and have relatively normal lives. Seeing war every day is not something that any child should be subjected to, and it's part of Russian shock wave of the war. It doesn't only impact people directly, hit by the bombs. It impacts the whole generation of Ukraine who will grow up knowing what war is about, seeing their friends die, their parents die, not receiving proper education, and moving on with their lives in this condition. There are a lot of challenges, and Ukraine been resilient in tackling them, but it's still very difficult.
Do we know how many children have actually died? I know in late February, right as talks were supposed to begin between Russia and the U.S., aiming apparently towards Trump's idea of peace, there were 3 toddlers who were killed. But there have been a lot of children killed, correct?
Yes. As far as this official data goes, we know of at least 684 killed children, and over 2,000 those who are wounded. And keep in mind that when a child is wounded, it's not just, a scratch on your cheek. 3% of these children, more or less, receive amputations and need to get prosthetics. So it impacts them for life. And let's keep in mind that this is only the children that Ukraine knows of. So these are the children on the territory that we control. I cannot even begin imagining how many children have been killed or otherwise impacted in occupied territories of Ukraine that we just don't know of, and Russia provides no data for. So the toll is pretty heavy.
It's pretty awful. I want to talk a little bit about an issue that was much more prominently discussed in 2022 and 2023, and that is the children stolen from Ukraine. I want to begin our discussion by playing a brief clip from a Ukrainian singer who has been touring Europe, Australia, Japan, and whose songs are now associated with what happened to the children of Donbas.
Коли ж тебе, доню, дожидати в гості, як поросте моя мамико, травка на помост, росла травка, стала посихати, ждала мати
So let's talk about the children and how they were taken from Donbass. We think of the war as having started in 2022 with the invasion, but in fact it goes back to 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea. And many of the children that have been taken, in fact, most of them, come from that region, the Donbass region. So can you tell us what happened in 2022? How were these children taken? Were they kidnapped off the streets? Tell us that story.
Of course. I think it's a great point that while the full-scale invasion unfolded in 2022, Russian war on Ukraine started in 2014. And it's a little-known fact that the abductions of children have started taking place in 2014. We just didn't have enough visibility into those crimes, and Russia used to be more subtle about it. As you mentioned in the beginning, in 2022, Russian plan was to just march across Donbass and the rest of Ukraine and take it within 3 days. And with that assumption, they just started occupying cities and did not really care anymore whether it's visible or not, started taking children away to Russia en masse and leaving a lot of evidence. This is how we know about the scale of abductions taking place. There is no one mechanism by which Russia abducts children, but there are patterns. One of the patterns that I think most visible is when Russia takes over the city, any institutions, boarding school, orphanages, regular schools are being just directed to, get on a bus and taken into unknown direction. Often the direction is previously occupied territories like Crimea or Donetsk, where Russia has a system to place those children into orphanages and then either re-educate them or send them to Russia. But there are lesser known, ways of that children have been taken away. In the beginning, a lot of parents were trying to escape occupied territories, and the only way to do it was through filtration camps, where parents were interrogated and subjected to cultural filtration to see if they have pro-Ukrainian views. And at that point, parents are separated from children, and if a parent didn't pass filtration or it took too long, the child could be placed again in Donetsk or Crimea, and from there could be adopted into the Russian family or sent far away into Russian East.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, being adopted into the Russian family. So, people listening might think, oh, gee, a child is in an orphanage, a child is disabled and living in an institution. Wouldn't it be better to be living with a family someplace? And gee, there are these Russians, they're willing to take them. Tell us why that is such a distorted view and what actually happens to these kids in Russia.
Of course, I've heard that sentiment. Isn't it better that they're in the families? And my answer is always, you know what? Russia had all these years to, establish an adoption exchange program. Didn't have to invade Ukraine to adopt all the poor Ukrainian kids. If Russians actually wanted and had as their goal to adopt Ukrainian orphans, that could have been done without the invasion. But it's just an excuse and the cover-up of the crime. When those children have been adopted, they're often placed in the families that are very aligned, ideologically inclined with the governing regime. Those are the families of acting military, former militaries, families that already have a lot of children. And it's a myth that there are a lot of Russians lining up to adopt Ukrainian children. Some of them do because of financial incentives that they receive. But the truth is that Russia cannot even place all of their orphaned children, and there are more children without parental care in Russia per capita than it is in Ukraine. So parents are actively approached and are imposed these children, and a lot of them cannot really take proper care of these kids. We know of the stories where one of the boys who was placed in foster care in Russian family committed suicide because he did not feel welcome, he did not feel at home, and he felt taken advantage of. We see a lot of children trying to escape those families because of very aggressive ideological brainwashing and a lot of abuse, and it's just something very creepy and evil to place a child in a family where somebody is actively trying to kill your country, to destroy your country.
Right, and as I understand it, these children, some of them have relatives. Some of them have parents who are, who want them back in Ukraine. But, when you think about it, Trump and his envoys, the people who are participating in these negotiations that have been ongoing, are real estate people primarily, his son-in-law and one of the people who's his sort of ambassador at large, Mr. Witkoff, who's in the real estate business and spent years. They seem to think this is all about territory. But this is more than about territory, right? We're talking about Russia trying to eliminate the Ukrainian people and turn Ukrainians into Russians. And that's what's happening with these kids in Russia.
Exactly. If it was a war about territory, why would they take Ukrainian children? Children are often hard to take care of as part of society. There is no immediate benefit to just like taking children. It's an intention of genocide, wiping Ukraine and making sure there is no recollection or societal memory about Ukraine being a nation. And that's what they do to these children. And when we talk about this trading territories, let's give you this concession for this part of Donbass, I always ask, do you understand that you're not giving away just like square feet? You're giving away like children who live there. As far as we know, there is at least 1.6 million children who live under occupation. And are we willing to give any part of them away in exchange for a very shaky and wobbly piece from Putin? This is not the war about the territories. It's not even war about the NATO, because all of these excuses and reasons, they just shatter across the crime of abduction. Why would you abduct children if it was about NATO or the territory?
Right. Before we actually turn to what's happening in those occupied territories and the children there, I want to talk a little bit about the successes in getting back some of the children. There have been the return of some children, right? And has the First Lady played a role in that? My recollection is that she has.
That is correct. So there are three ways in which Ukrainian children have been rescued. First way is Ukrainians themselves organized rescue missions into Russia or occupied territories of Russia. There could be a parent or a grandparent looking for a child, and there's trips organized to help retrieve a child. Children themselves may be willing to escape and need assistance crossing the border. So that seemed to be the most productive way of rescuing children. As of February, we know of almost 2,000 children who've been rescued that way. Not all of them have been abducted. Some of them have been taken away from, have been rescued from occupied territories and were at risk of being drafted to the Russian army or being abducted as their peers. But it has been successful in retrieving children. The effort you're talking about is the mediation path. Qatar and the First Lady of the United States have been involved in receiving some lists from Ukraine. What children do you know of that have been abducted? And then trying to negotiate with Russia however many they can. As of February 17, we know of 20 Ukrainian children that were rescued due to the effort of the First Lady Melania Trump. It is worth noting that, again, not all of those children have been technically abducted. Some of these children just happen to be separated because of family circumstances or the war. For example, a mother of a child used to live with a child in Russia, but then the mother passed away and the child has relatives in Ukraine and the child wants to go back to Ukraine. That is not technically an abduction. Right. This is normal social ties and family reunification efforts that taken place before or after the invasion under any circumstances. But then there are the latest return involved the return of 3 children who've been taken away from Kherson orphanage in 2022. Those children have parents. They've been in the institution called an orphanage because parents needed assistance to take care of children. It could be financial, it could be housing, etc. But they have parents with whom they have very close relationships, and those parents have not seen their kids for 3 years. Like, can you imagine?
Yeah.
The last time you see your child 3 years old, now they're 6.
Right.
It's unimaginable. So Russia tries to mix those children together as if it's all circumstances.
All the same, right? Yeah, it's all the same. And I mean, for the families, the 20 families or the 3 families that are involved, that's obviously wonderful that they've been reunited. But this is a drop in the bucket. We're talking about thousands. We think 20,000. We don't really know the numbers, as I think you and others have pointed out. The people who know the numbers are the Russians, and they're not telling. I do want to move on, though, to a different aspect, and that is the children that are living in the occupied parts of Ukraine. Because what's happening there, I mean, as I was reading about it, what's happening there is the indoctrination of these children. They're basically being brainwashed. I'm old enough to remember, the Stalin era, Young Pioneers program, the Cultural Revolution, when Mao basically, led these young Red Guards, and they were all indoctrinated in this ideology. Something similar is going on now, though, in Ukraine, is it not?
Exactly. I think Russia, China, Iran, they share the playbooks for, waging wars, and a lot of that playbook includes radicalization and indoctrination of youth. So now, with Russia occupying parts of Ukraine, Ukrainian children are part of Russian policy of indoctrination and militarization of children. We know about more than 1 million kids in occupied Ukraine who are subjected to this. Every school in occupied territory of Ukraine is now run by the Russian curriculum. And Russian ways of history, views of history, always point to America and NATO as number one enemy. So Ukraine is not even a direct and number one priority for Russia as an enemy. It's always the US, it's always the West with its ways. I call this policy the quiet killer, because you don't really lose children in a physical way. Children continue to live, study, and go their way.
It's their minds. You're stealing their minds, essentially, right?
They turn them into Russians. They turn them into the future soldiers. We know of hundreds of children who've been recruited to the paramilitaristic movements in Russia, in unoccupied Ukraine, and we realize that this is number one indication that Putin is not preparing for peace. If anything, Putin is preparing for a larger war, because this is a part of this huge recruitment movement as Russia prepares youth for the future wars. And those wars will not stop in Ukraine. Those wars will go further west, and this is something we need to consider and be prepared for.
And there's also, of course, the draft in this area. So if you're 17 years old and a male, you can be drafted to fight in the war in Ukraine. So what they're doing is really turning Ukrainian soldiers against their brothers and sisters and cousins in Ukraine. They're turning them into fodder. I guess they ran out of North Koreans and other mercenary troops to send in. So now they want to turn Ukrainian children into soldiers to fight fellow Ukrainians.
Exactly. And as you know, it recently became known that Russia takes Ukrainian children to North Korean camps as well. And we know of some cultural exchanges, as Russia calls it, where children have been taken on trips to China. So it is obvious that Russia is preparing for a larger war by recruiting these children and turning them into soldiers. And when we think about patriotic upbringing, it doesn't really ring a bell as something dangerous. Who wouldn't want their children to be patriots of their country? But that's the thing. Russia doesn't raise Ukrainian children to be patriots of Ukraine, but of Russia. And that patriotic education includes very, very aggressive militarization. Some of the kids that have escaped those military camps tell us about, they've been taught how to, throw the grenades, or how to assemble, disassemble a weapon, how to operate drones, first aid on the front line. They've been thrown into resurrected from Soviet era military games called Tsarnitsa, where they reenact military situations. They have to run around a particular designated area, hide, and pretend that it's actual war. And Russian soldiers are the trainers in these camps, and during exercises, they make it very real. Like, there are grenades explosions, children have to run and jump and, dig trenches. We know children have been hurt during these games, like breaking their legs, having concussions. It is real. It is very, very real.
And you know what, again, what it reminds me of is some of the wars in Africa where children were made into soldiers. And one of the reasons that worked is that particularly with young boys, boys who were just early adolescents, they don't always have the same kind of regulation of their emotions, of their empathy. They don't even really understand the concept of death. I mean, a lot, certainly here in the West, kids grow up playing video games. So, shooting a gun seems like fun. Oh, yeah, let's see how many targets I can get. But this is real. And what you're talking about, I think, is something that I think is very, very misunderstood in the United States. What's happening in Ukraine is not just about Ukraine. You've talked about it in terms of needing soldiers for future wars. Putin's made it very clear. He wants to reconstitute what was the Soviet Empire. He's an old KGB agent. He has grand ambitions. It doesn't stop with Ukraine. If, in fact, he succeeds in being able to take Ukrainian territory to try to swallow up Ukraine, it's not going to end there, right?
Absolutely. The scale of this operation is immense. Only in 2025, we know that Russia budgeted from federal budget over $800 million for re-education of youth. And for comparison, one organization called Movement of the First, which militarizes children, received more federal money from Russia than a region of Kalmykia, which is one of the poorest Russian regions dependent on federal funding. This really sets and demonstrates priorities of Russia, which is raising the future soldiers and switching their economy, policy, and everything on military rails. So all these attempts to bring peace and talk about peace without actual security guarantees just seem like enabling the aggressor rather than real peace efforts. There is sentiment that if we interfere right now and try to negotiate with Putin, we will prevent Russia from being closer with China. It's too late.
Right,
if we don't,
right. China's very heavily involved.
Exactly. They are allies on paper and in action. And yes, that maybe that alliance is not value-based, but it is transactional and it works. And we should look at the bigger picture, not just on immediate promises of Putin. We can see even how it works with the returns of children with the First Lady. Like, the office is trying to negotiate as many children as possible, but Putin is obviously trying to blur the lines between circumstances and a crime, try to drag out the returns. Why Putin didn't return 5,000 children in February?
Correct.
Why,
right.
why
he could
only
have done
5?
it immediately. I mean, he could have just said, okay, we're returning these kids, and he chose not to. It's very frustrating living in the United States and seeing what's happened politically to the support for Ukraine. In the early days of the war, it was front page news. It dominated all of legacy media and the new media as well. We were very, very aware of what was happening in Mariupol and in Kyiv and in all of the various cities. I mean, we watched it live on television. We don't see those images anymore. It's like a back burner issue to most Americans. And my hope is that when Americans, particularly American women, when they start hearing this in terms of not just soldiers being killed, not even just innocent adult civilians being killed, not even just children being killed, but the way in which children are being transformed into soldiers, and soldiers who are going to fight a war maybe against our children, that will motivate people. So what is it people can do? What are the practical things that Americans can do that can help in this effort?
Absolutely. I think you're spot on saying that we can appeal to women more than we have been so for now, and talk through the lenses of human lives and children's lives rather than some tactical advantages or disadvantages on the front line. That's what I've been working on recently. I think that this issue naturally sits with especially conservative women who've been always on the front line of child welfare, and why we've been doing a lot of outreach into those communities. And what I found out is that women really care, and it's not a political, it's not a partisan issue. They just don't know about it. And we're talking about like 5th year into war, and the awareness in some of those bubbles is very low. So every time I talk to women, to religious leaders, influencers, I ask them, number one, talk to one person who doesn't know about this issue. Spread the word. I've been working on this for 4 years, and I see that there's still like areas and blind spots that people are just not aware of. So spread awareness, share about it in your community is number one. Number two is, of course, support the efforts of rescue missions that are taking place right now. Mediation by Qatar and the First Lady brought back roughly 100 children. Almost 2,000 have been rescued. So it's worth supporting those grassroots rescue operations that are taking place in Ukraine, and organizations like Save Ukraine or Helping to Live or Child Rights Network. But also what it was important to understand, there's this feeling that we are here in the US and nothing we can really do to help this. There is legislation in Congress right now that, for example, puts a deadline on Putin to return children. As you mentioned, it's really frustrating to see Putin dragging this issue along and along, and only 5 children, 5,000 have been returned. I think he needs encouragement, and I think the First Lady needs a little help from Senate to set a deadline to return all the children. There is a bill in Senate by Lindsey Graham that threatens to designate Russia state sponsor of terrorism if Putin doesn't return children within 65 days. I think if that was adopted, that would be very powerful and clear message to Putin. We're not messing around. Call your senator.
It would indeed. Unfortunately, this administration has set down various markers. I remember the 2 weeks. If Putin doesn't reach, a peace deal in 2 weeks, there's going to be sanctions, worse sanctions against Russia. That, of course, did not happen. And we've seen that kind of foot dragging. I will say, Katya, that we here at the Renewed Democracy Initiative have been very involved, as you know, on the Ukraine issue. We have literally donated millions of dollars in humanitarian aid to Ukraine, everything from water treatment to generators, because the whole question of energy is so important, to sleeping bags, to meals ready to eat. So we're doing our bit as well, and I know you are doing it too at Rhizome, and I wish you the best, and thank you very much for being our guest today.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the support. Every dollar counts, especially in times like this.
Thank you, Katya. If you want to support Older Wiser and the work of the Renewed Democracy Initiative, you can do so by becoming a premium subscriber to The Next Move. Doing so costs just $7 a month, and for a limited time until March 4th, 30% off, gets you early access to this show, invitations to exclusive Zoom calls with Garry Kasparov and other pro-democracy leaders, and automatic entry into raffles and contests. I'm Linda Chavez, and this has been Older Wiser from RDI and The Next Move. Until next time, put the phone down, stop doom scrolling, and keep up the fight. Thanks for tuning in.